Welcome to this explainer. So, today we're going to explore a truly fascinating concept: how mastering your everyday interpersonal friction actually holds the precise key to solving our society's deepest, most overwhelming political divides. Now, I know that sounds like a massive leap, right? But I promise you, the connection here is incredibly direct and honestly, it's incredibly powerful. Let's get into it. Okay, let's just dive right into this with a quick, highly relatable test. Do you recognize any of the personalities popping up here? Seriously, take a second and think about your daily life, your workplace, maybe even your family gatherings. I am almost certain someone just popped into your head. Look, whether you're dealing with the griper, the one who just complains instead of ever finding solutions, or maybe the dictator who bullies and demands at the office, we all face difficult people. It's just a universal human experience. But here's the absolute secret we're going to unpack today. The real issue with these tense interactions, it actually starts with our own perception. So here is our roadmap for today. First, the problem with perception. Second, cleaning your mental filter. Third, 5 types of listening. Fourth, how to react effectively. And finally, bridging the political divide. All right, section 1, the problem with perception. Let's start with that micro-level everyday problem by examining the psychology of perception and how it essentially creates friction right out of thin air. Just look closely at these purple beans for a second. Your brain is probably perceiving them as moving or waving, right? Well, they aren't. It is a completely static image, and this instantly proves how our minds can literally distort reality. See, our brains are hardwired to process visual and conversational cues in ways that don't always align with the objective truth. And this next one brilliantly illustrates that exact same concept in a different way. You've probably seen this classic optical illusion before. Two people can look at the identical image at the exact same moment. One sees a duck and the other sees a rabbit. So who's right? Actually, they both are. This just goes to show that our individual mental filters fundamentally alter our viewpoints. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that our perceptions act as mental filters. And sometimes these filters are heavily fueled by our implicit biases or our past experiences. They take the raw, objective information we receive, like the actual words being said, and they distort it into a subjective reality. Think about it. If you expect someone to be difficult, well, your filter is going to process their words to ensure they sound exactly that, difficult. Moving on to section 2. Cleaning your mental filter. Let's look at some really actionable steps to clear out those mental filters before your communication completely collapses. Okay, check out this highly stressed worker attempting to do like 10 things at once. We've all been there, right? Typing an email while nodding along on a Zoom call. But the data is super clear on this. Human beings are fundamentally terrible multitaskers. Attempting to multitask while listening to someone is just a massive mistake. It totally clogs your mental filter, it makes you miss crucial context, and worst of all, it'll instantly cost you the confidence and trust of the person trying to speak with you. But hey, beyond multitasking, we frequently fall into a few other common traps. We suffer from informational overload, where we basically just hit a wall and stop processing new data. Or we fall victim to internal distractions, getting lost in our own heads, silently preparing our brilliant rebuttals instead of actually genuinely listening. And that inevitably leads to highly inappropriate responses, like offering unsolicited advice or jumping straight to criticism, which just entirely derails any chance of mutual understanding. Which brings us nicely to section 3, 5 types of listening. To correct those bad habits, we must first admit that effective listening is not some innate talent. We actually have to learn it by breaking it down into its core mechanics. We can actually categorize our listening toolkit into 5 distinct types. It's like having a tool belt. You've got to know which tool to use and exactly when to use it. This ranges from simply recalling specific details, like catching names and dates for action items, all the way up to evaluative listening, which you'd use to assess the strengths and weaknesses of a proposal. But out of these 5, there are 2 in particular that I really want to highlight today for dealing with friction. The first one is big picture listening. This is when you deliberately take a step back from the immediate noise and all the emotional heat of a conversation. You ask yourself the big, overarching questions. How is this information actually going to affect our team in 5 years? Or how would I explain this entire situation to a complete outsider? Doing this instantly shifts your mental filter from feeling defensive to being analytical. And conversely, we have empathetic listening. Now, this one is absolutely vital for conflict resolution. It literally requires you to hand over the reins and let the speaker lead the conversation. Your only job here is to remain utterly attentive, avoid interrupting at all costs, and simply reflect on what they're saying. Honestly, it takes an immense amount of time and energy, but guys, it is the absolute key to disarming a difficult person. All right, moving into section 4, how to react effectively. Because now that we know how to actively absorb information and tune those filters, we have to figure out how to react when things inevitably get tense. When you find yourself in a difficult interaction, you can deploy what the sources actually call magical phrases. We're talking about phrases like, "Tell me more," "That's interesting," or "Help me understand why you'd say that." So what exactly makes them magical? Well, they don't concede your point at all, but they do safely keep the dialogue wide open. They essentially force the other person to explain their logic, and that very act often de-escalates all that heightened emotion. Look, when friction hits, there are definitely clear right and wrong ways to react. The absolute don'ts: don't take it personally, avoid getting defensive, skip the sarcasm, and whatever you do, no making excuses. Instead, you need to deliberately choose the do's, consciously remain calm, use I statements rather than pointing the finger with accusatory you statements, and focus purely on the objective facts of the situation. In these moments, empathy is quite literally your shield. Okay, section 5, bridging the political divide. Let's zoom out from the office and those micro-level everyday annoyances and look at the macro-level application of these exact same interpersonal listening skills. Our political divide in the United States is growing at a truly staggering rate. Just take a look at this number, 60. According to Pew Research data, over 60% of registered voters now view those in the opposing party not just as wrong, but as actually immoral, dishonest, and closed-minded. Think about that for a second. We are literally looking at half the country through a deeply distorted, highly negative mental filter. And this is definitely not just some minor statistical blip. Longtime political observer and Boston College professor Peter Scarry notes that America's current rancorous divisions are, in many respects, even more disruptive and threatening than the massive cultural turmoil of the 1960s. I mean, think about the 60s, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the assassinations of that era. Scarry argues that our sheer inability to speak across the aisle today represents a uniquely profound threat to our society. So, the big question is, how on earth do we fix a national crisis of perception? Well, to tackle this impartially, Scurry works with the Braver Angels Initiative. It's this fascinating cross-partisan organization dedicated to depolarizing politics. And they don't do this by arguing over policy. They do it by utilizing grassroots citizens' conversations. These are highly structured, rigorous exercises in those exact active, empathetic listening skills we just talked about. They bring people together to depolarize incredibly complex issues, like immigration, by essentially forcing citizens from across the political spectrum to just sit down, suspend those mental filters, and truly, genuinely listen to one another. And that brings us to our final and maybe most important takeaway. Since we can ultimately only control our own mental filters and our own reactions, you actually have a daily choice to make. As the source material really wisely states, you don't have to show up to every fight you're invited to. Whether it's a difficult coworker or a massive political disagreement, silence and active listening are far and away your most powerful tools. So the question I'm going to leave you with today is simply this: will you choose to listen? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a brand new lens for your next tough conversation.